Hey there, it's Tom Corson-Knowles, and in this video we're going to talk about the market analysis and market research for the children's book market. Now I'm going to talk about not only children's books for ebooks, Kindle books, for print books and audiobooks as well. And I want to give you kind of an overview of the entire market. Now I have to say that this market, in my opinion, has been one of the most misunderstood markets, especially by new authors. And even for myself, I really didn't understand this market for several years. You know, when we published our first children's books, we initially just published them in ebook format and honestly failed miserably, really had horrible sales. And it's because I just didn't understand the market. And so I want to share with you as much knowledge and information as I've learned about this market in this video as I can. So kind of the first thing you want to know is that there's a couple myths about this market and misunderstandings, common misunderstandings. And the first one is that, what do you think of when you hear about a children's book? Right? Most people, when you hear the word children's book, you think of the typical children's picture book, which is generally maybe 20 to 40 pages. It's going to have lots of illustrations. And that's kind of what a children's picture book is to most people. And most authors, when you think of, that's what you think about. But when you look at the industry and how the Amazon bestseller charts work, how the BISAC industry categories and bestseller categories work, they list a lot more than just children's picture books in this whole children's books category, right? So for example, children's literature, right? Children's literature, things like Harry Potter, right? That's a children's literature book. And so when you look at the size of the children's book market, and it's including children's picture books as well as books like Harry Potter, which have sold hundreds of millions of copies, it really distorts the market. And so if you would just to look at numbers on how big is the children's book market, the vast majority of those numbers, of those sales, of that money is actually going to children's novels, not children's picture books, right? Things like Harry Potter and The Hunger Games are listed in the industry as children's books, but they're children's novels, they're children's literature, they're not children's picture books. And so because of this kind of misunderstanding, a lot of authors go into this market and think, oh, I'm going to get rich writing children's picture books. And I have to tell you that that's possible. I mean, I know there are a few authors who have really hit it big in children's picture books, but it's a very difficult market. It's much smaller than you would think just by looking at industry numbers. And that's because, the industry lists the children's literature as well as children's picture books in that data. So I want to take you now through the charts and the bestseller rankings for Kindle ebooks in this children's book market. And I'm going to organize by competitiveness here. So the number one most competitive book on Amazon is linked right here. So we can see the most competitive categories to see, what are the biggest sellers, right? And so when we do this, this category here, the number one children's ebook in arts, music, and photography is ranked number 2 in the entire Kindle store. It's selling maybe 100,000 copies a month, right? That's massive, right? And so if we actually go to this page and take a look at it, we'll see that this is actually Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, right? It's a Harry Potter book. And this is what you're going to, if you start browsing through this bestseller list, you're going to notice, Harry Potter's at the top of most of them. Other things like, J.K. Rowling's new book about Fantastic Beasts is the number 2 book in this category. So a lot of these things are really novels. They're not children's picture books. And so these things are selling, millions of copies, and it's obviously a huge market, but it's very different from what most people think of when they think of children's books. So just be aware of that and do your research. So this is one of those markets where you definitely want to go through the competitive categories like this, take a look at these books, see what they're like, see what they're about. Look inside them, look at the reviews of readers, see what they're saying about these books, what they love about these books, what they don't like about these books. Really do your research as you would for any other market, but I say especially in this market, really do your research well, because there is that market confusion between books like this, which kind of looks like a children's picture book, and books like Harry Potter, which is, it's a novel. It's a very long novel, and it's a very different kind of book. So make sure you understand that market and do your research in that way. So what I would recommend you do is go through all the top categories here and look at the top best-selling books. And when you do this now and just browsing through here, you're going to notice that most of these top categories here with these really high-ranking books that are selling tons and tons of copies, these are all literature, right? This isn't children's picture books. These are literature books. These are fantasy books, those kinds of things, okay? So do that research. So I want to show you an example of a kind of the typical children's picture book right here. So this is a book called You Are Not Small by Anna Kang. And I'm just going to look inside here on the Kindle edition, and you just go through and you can see this is just like a typical children's picture book. It's got lots of illustrations, very few words on the page. this is kind of the typical children's picture book, okay? That's what they look like. And so this one is 32 pages long. And again, that's pretty typical for the market. I say most are like 20 to 40 pages. Obviously some are longer, some are shorter, but that's pretty typical for the children's picture book market. And this particular book is actually selling pretty darn well. It's number 706 paid in the Kindle store. It's selling quite well. This is one of the top children's picture books on Kindle right now at this moment. So I don't want you to think that it's impossible to sell a lot of children's picture books on Amazon, on Kindle, but it's a difficult market, and it's much smaller, again, than you would think if you just looked at the overall rankings, not understanding that really the bestsellers tend to be novels and not children's picture books. Okay, and now I want to show you the physical book category rankings for the children's book market. And when you browse through these as well, you'll notice that there are, again, some incredibly competitive categories here for physical books, for children's books. I mean, these the number one book number one book in print right now here is a children's book, but again, it's Harry Potter, right? So, and all the top books in this market are Harry Potter, and then Hunger Games, more Harry Potter, more Hunger Games, The Hobbit, right? So these are all novels. The top 20 on this page are all novels or related to the Harry Potter franchise or another major franchise like the Hunger Games, okay? Again, just really do your research in this market to understand it and check out the categories to see, where your book would fit in the categories that you're looking at. Now, there are lots of physical children's books that are selling very well on Amazon. And in my experience, the children's book market on Amazon for Amazon sales is going to be much bigger for actually print books, physical books. And that's kind of typical of the children's book market for children's picture books in general. They're generally going to sell a lot better in physical format than in ebook formats. So, for example, this book, Giraffes Can't Dance. It looks like a typical children's picture book. If we look inside, we can see it's got the illustrations. It's got just a couple sentences here and there on each page. Not a huge book, and there's several formats here. So there's a audible, audio CD, a digital audiobook, physical audiobook, a board book, a paperback, and a hardcover. So 3 types of physical books. And the board book version of it is selling incredibly well on Amazon. Number 48 in books. It's selling a ton of books right now. So again, you can do very well with children's books, children's picture books, and children's novels. But just doing your research is going to be crucial. And typically, industry average, you're going to sell more physical books than ebooks in this market. Now, you can publish audiobooks as well. As you see here, this book has audiobooks, the digital audiobook on audible.com, as well as an audio CD product. Now, when you actually go to acx.com and if you email the support team and say, you've got a children's picture book you want to publish, they're going to recommend you actually don't publish it. They're going to recommend you don't do an audiobook for your children's picture book. Doesn't mean you can't do it. They just, in their experience, that they just don't sell very well. And in our experience with the TCK Publishing, we haven't really sold a lot of children's audiobooks either for these children's picture books, just because they're so short. It is a very short book, a couple thousand words at most. And so, the audiobook length is, maybe 20 minutes or 10 minutes or less. It's, a very short book. And so a lot of, Audible customers just don't really want to pay for that. It just doesn't seem that there's a big market right now for audiobooks for children's picture books. Now, having said that, doesn't mean you can't do it. Because the book is so short, it's going to cost you almost nothing, to produce an audiobook. You can do it for $50 or sometimes $25 to hire a professional narrator to narrate and produce your audiobook. So there's not really going to be much financial investment, so there's not really any reason not to do it. I just don't want you to go into it thinking you're going to sell thousands and thousands of audiobooks because in my experience, it just doesn't really tend to happen in this market. Now, another thing you're going to notice about books, children's picture books, is that they tend to have different types, right? So there's a hardcover for the physical book. There's a hardcover, a paperback, and a board book here. And all of these books here are most likely offset printed. In other words, they're not using print-on-demand publishing like CreateSpace. They're using offset printing. And then the reason is, if you look at the book and you look inside of it, it's full of color. It's got illustrations. You don't want to do a black and white children's picture book because, you want the color, you want the illustrations, you want it to look really, really nice for kids and for parents so they can really enjoy the book. And that's how a children's picture book should be enjoyed, in full color. And the problem is when you do print-on-demand publishing, it's going to cost a lot of money to do a full color printing for any kind of book. And so even though your book might only be 30 or 40 pages, it's not very big, it's still going to cost you a ton of extra money to print that book with print on demand because it is in color. So, today with print on demand technology, printing books in color is just very rarely financially viable, right? So, for this book, they're selling at $11.91 for hardcover, at $5.20 for a board book. Your printing costs on CreateSpace, if you want to print on demand this book, would probably be, $8 to $10. And that's just the cost of printing. And then you add on top of that, Amazon's cut, and you have to retail your book for like $15 or $20 just to make a small profit. And so that's going to price you out of the market. The other problem with print-on-demand printing for a children's picture book is that because it's in color, because you need it to be in color, and because you want a really high-quality book, print-on-demand technology just isn't there to give you that kind of book you typically tend to think of when you think of a children's picture book. You think of like a hardcover book. It's just a really nice quality book, but a paperback book with print-on-demand publishing, it's not going to be a hardcover, right? It's going to be a paperback book. It's going to have kind of not the nicest binding in the world. So, print-on-demand publishing is amazing for novels, for nonfiction books. But when it comes to a children's picture book in color, you're not going to get the same quality. And so the vast majority of high-selling books in this market are going to be printed with an offset printer. And essentially what that means is you need to go, you can Google, offset printing for children's books, and you can talk to lots of different printers and get quotes on what it would cost. But generally, you're going to order at least 250 to 500 copies of inventory at a time. So you can do a print run of 250 to 500 copies or more each time. And your printing cost is going to be so much lower than print on demand. You might be able to get a children's picture book done for $2 or $3 or $4 or $5, depending on all the different options you want and need. So it's going to be very cheap. Your printing cost is going to be very, very low, and that's going to allow you to lower the price that you sell your book at. But the other issues you're going to run into then is that you need to have inventory, right? So you have to have inventory. You have to somewhere to ship that inventory. So you can either ship it to your own house, you can ship it to Amazon, and they can fulfill for you. You can ship it to another kind of fulfillment company, and they can fulfill it for you and fulfill orders for you. So there's just a little bit more management that goes into it when you're doing offset printing. You also have to make sure you manage the inventory, so you don't want to run out of inventory, right? If you sell a whole bunch of books and you only have 200 in inventory, you have to go print more books and send them to the warehouse and then have them delivered to the customer. And so that can create backlogs and times when your book is out of print and not available for customers, which means you're losing sales. So inventory management is really crucial if you're going to go the offset printing route. So these are just all kinds of things you need to really understand and take into account if you're planning to go into this market. So if you don't have the big budget, I'd recommend start with print on demand, see what you can do, and then when you can actually afford the inventory to go with offset printing route, that's what I would definitely recommend you do. But again, you just have to make sure if this is something that you want to do, because you are going to have to manage inventory. You are going to have to find a distributor, whether it's Amazon or another fulfillment company, to actually deliver the books to your customers. So there's a little bit more management involved. It's not just as simple as uploading a file like it is for an ebook. It's a little bit more complicated when you do offset printing. Now, another thing you want to do when you're in this market for children's picture books, you really want to make sure you have good illustrations. So this is not something you want to hire to, your 12-year-old nephew or, just some random person that you met. You really want a high quality illustration. You really want it to look professional. You really want it to look good. It doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. Illustrations tend to be, pretty darn affordable, honestly. Maybe a couple $100, sometimes less, sometimes more. Really depends on who you're working with. If you're looking for sites to find great illustrators, Upwork.com and Guru.com are two great places to find freelancers, whether that's illustrators or editors or cover designers. It's just a great place to find people. And you can post your project on there, post your details, post what you're looking for, and they'll give you quotes and bids, and you can look at the illustrations they've done before for other authors and other projects and see who's the best fit for your project. But you really don't want to skimp on illustrations because it's an absolutely crucial part of creating a great children's picture book. Now, another big distribution channel and sales channel for children's picture books, especially paperbacks, hardcovers, physical children's picture books, but also for ebooks and even audiobooks as well sometimes, is through libraries. So libraries are huge, huge buyers of children's books and children's picture books. And so it can be an absolutely huge source of sales for you. In fact, when you look at libraries, the books that the librarians demand the most are actually children's books, right? Children's picture books especially, but also novels, things like Harry Potter and so forth. So because it's such a big market, you might want to consider really contacting librarians, contacting your local library, contacting libraries all over the US and Canada and all over in your market to try to get them to actually sell your book. And most librarians are very, very open to stocking books from independent authors, self-published authors. So, there really isn't much of a barrier to entry there. You really just have to go out and actually make those sales, introduce yourself and introduce your work and get them interested in stocking your book. But if you do that, once you get into one library system, let's say in your state or your county, it tends to go out and be available to all the libraries connected to that system. And so, you might only start with selling that to 1 or 2 or 3 libraries, but it can grow very quickly from there. And you can actually get a whole bunch of sales and a good bit of revenue from selling to libraries. So that is one market you probably want to look into for distribution for your children's picture books. Now, if you're wondering why I haven't talked too much in this video about, children's literature, children's novels, that's just because those books actually are, in my opinion, shouldn't really even be called children's books. I don't think the industry is doing things in a way that really provides clarity to the consumer or to authors. And so, a book like, let's say, Harry Potter, right? Or let's use Hunger Games as an example, right? That's like an adventure book. It's a thriller book, right? That's the genre of it. And so even though those books might appeal to children, the vast majority of those readers are teenagers and adults. And so it's not really, in my opinion, a children's book. It's really a novel. It's a genre title. And so, if you have a children's novel that you think kids are going to love to read and adults and teenagers are going to love to read, in my opinion, you should market that not as a children's book. You should market that as the genre that it is, right? So if you're writing a romance, honestly, most children's books, children's novels, and children's literature probably aren't romances. They're things more like mystery and sci-fi and thriller and drama, right? Those kinds of books, I would market that as that genre title. And so you can still list your book in these categories. So when you're in Bestseller Ranking Pro and you're looking at these children's ebooks categories and you're writing a children's novel, by all means, have your book listed in these categories if it makes sense for you, like this children's ebook, science fiction, fantasy, and scary stories. Have it listed in there, but just understand that when it comes to, designing your book cover, designing your description, doing your marketing and promotion, that you're marketing it not necessarily only as a children's book, but really as a science fiction and fantasy story that everyone from, a 6-year-old to an 80-year-old is going to enjoy. That, in my opinion, is going to get you the most success in the long run. All right, I hope this video has been helpful for you to better understand the children's book market for children's picture books as well as children's novels. If you have any questions about it, want to talk to me more, feel free to reach out. I'm here for you. Wishing you incredible success. Take care.